You'll meet some people in life who'll tell you that the only sure way to make money is by investing in property, and that other plans, pensions in particular, are just too uncertain and generally not as good. Now, many of those people will have good reasons to think that, particularly those born between, let's say, 1950 and 1970, because not only will they have experienced the incredible boom in property prices since they first bought, they'll have witnessed pension scandals, loss of benefits, and the general disappearance of guaranteed private company schemes. In this video, I'm going to put property and pensions head to head and give you the facts. I think they both offer major advantages. So I'm going to explain where they each win over the other, but I'm also going to explain where people just get things wrong. By the end of this, you'll have a good understanding of how both can help you reach your goals. And when people tell you that property is the only way to go, you'll be able to offer a well-reasoned counter-argument. If you're joining me for the first time, I'm Chris Bourne. I'm a financial planner who's been helping people achieve tax-efficient financial independence in the UK for the past 17 years. My weekly content is all focused on that, so be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications if you haven't already. And let's get into pensions versus property. So let's first talk about property as an investment. Why is its popularity so enduring? Well, there is the fact that you can see it and touch it, and anybody can understand the purpose that it serves. That straight away gives people a lot of comfort because it means they understand what they're buying, and that helps them feel in control of their destiny. As well as that though, many people will have seen the value of their own home rocket over the past few decades, and that's what their opinion is largely based on. Depending on where you are in the country, it's possible for a property bought for £50,000, let's say in the mid-1980s, to be worth close to seven figures today. Now, nobody can argue that that is phenomenal growth, but it doesn't tell the full story. You see, £50,000 might be the figure in someone's mind as the purchase cost, but when you take into account the amount of money that would need to have been spent on top of that, the starting figure is significantly higher. To begin with, most people will have used a mortgage to buy their house, and they'd have paid interest on that loan over maybe 25 years, generally at much higher rates than are around today. That may have tripled the purchase cost. Then there'd have been decades worth of bills to pay just in order to stay in the house. Electricity, gas, water, council tax. The house wouldn't be theirs today if they hadn't paid those. And then there's the cost of upkeep. How many redecorations would have taken place? How many times have the carpets and floors been changed? There's probably been extensions built, a nice orangery attached to the back, all of which would have cost many thousands of pounds. Without doing those things, the house would have fallen into disrepair and wouldn't be worth close to what it is today. So as you can see, what people think was a £50,000 purchase was probably hundreds of thousands more than that in reality. Now, don't get me wrong, the growth will still have been really good, but the mistake some people make is saying things like, well, my pension's useless. I started it 30 years ago and I'll be lucky if it pays for a weekly grocery shop. My house has gone up in value 10 times since then. The problem is, of course, that they only started paying £30 a month into their pension and have barely increased it to keep up with inflation since. If they paid hundreds of thousands of pounds into a pension like they had their house, it would be a very different story. It's sometimes a shock to people when they're told that as an asset class, stocks will invariably always return more than property over the long term. We can see here that both global stocks and UK stocks have beaten residential and commercial property growth since 1995. And it's those types of returns that you can access through a pension. But there's one big important thing missed there. There's one huge advantage of property investing that from a growth perspective can blow anything else away, and that's the power of cheap borrowing. The ability to leverage the asset and purchase something much more expensive than you actually lay down makes an unbelievably big difference. To give you an example, if you had £30,000 and used it as a down payment on an investment property, you may be able to purchase something for, let's say, £120,000. The other £90,000 could be borrowed using a buy-to-let mortgage. Let's assume that's on an interest-only basis and the rate is 3%. You'd be paying £2,700 a year for it. When you buy a house, there are other costs, especially if you're looking to spruce it up to sell. So let's assume there are £5,000 of renovation costs and £2,000 of legal and other fees. If you sold that house in a year's time for £140,000, you'd then need to pay the mortgage off, so you'd be left with £50,000. Now take off the initial £30,000 investment, the mortgage payments of £2,700, the costs of £7,000, and let's say bills of £2,000. You're left with profit of £8,300. That's a 27.66% return on investment based on putting £30,000 in. So despite being expensive to maintain, the ability to leverage property, and not only that, to borrow money at far lower rates than other types of finance, is a massive tick in the box for property investment. Let's not get too carried away though, because as with anything in life, nothing is perfect. There are areas where pensions can win, and I think they come into 5 categories. And they are tax treatment, diversification, time, cost, and liquidity. I'll go through each of them to explain. As you'll know if you've watched me for a while, I talk a lot about the tax treatment of pensions on this channel, because they do give some major benefits. The big winning factor is the tax relief they provide. If we use the same example of £30,000 invested into a pension, how would that compare to the property scenario? Well, with basic rate tax relief at source, the £30,000 would immediately be increased to £37,500, a 25% uplift. Okay, to be able to do this, you'd need to be earning at least £37,500 a year. But let's just say that you are. If we then assume that the investment grew by that global stock market average I showed earlier of 8.26%, it would increase to £40,597 after the first year. There'd be some platform and management costs to pay of, let's say, 1%, so that would leave us with £40,191. So that's a £10,191 return on investment over the year, or 33.97%. That outstrips the property. Not only that, but there are other major tax benefits too. If you're a higher rate taxpayer, you could claim a further £7,500 of tax relief, or up to £9,375 extra if you pay tax at the additional rate. When you come to take income out, there's advantages there too, because you can take 25% of your pension out as a tax-free lump sum. So if we assumed your personal allowance was already used up, let's compare receiving £2,000 a month from a pension and £2,000 a month rental income from property. If you were in the basic rate tax band, your net rental income would be £1,600 a month. If you took tax-free lump sum alongside taxable income from your pension every month though, only £1,500 would be taxed rather than the full £2,000. So your net pension income would be £1,700 a month. Also, gains made on investments within a pension are not subject to capital gains tax, which means you can easily sell and change investment strategy at any time. But gains made on properties are subject to capital gains tax, and currently that could be either 18% or 28% depending on which income band you fall into. Finally, if you've built up a substantial pension fund, it's all completely sheltered from inheritance tax. That's a 40% tax on all of your assets above a certain level when you die. And property is certainly not exempt from IHT. So that could mean a further 40% of the value of these assets is lost to your beneficiaries. Diversification is another key aspect when considering property versus pensions as your main retirement vehicle. The thing to be clear on is that property is an asset class in its own right. A pension is a tax wrapper. That simply means that you can hold lots of different types of investment in one place, and they can balance out the risk of you being overexposed to something. If the property market crashes and all you hold is property, you're going to be in trouble. But if you hold stocks, bonds, commodities and other assets as well, they may offset some of your losses. They can also provide protection against the more specific personal risks of property investing, such as when you have a bad tenant who doesn't pay their rent, or long vacant periods where a house is unlet, or a renovation project that hasn't gone to plan and leads to you making a loss. When it comes to time, it's undeniable that property will cost you more of it. In the example I gave earlier, finding, purchasing and renovating a property will take quite a lot of time and involve a number of people, including estate agents, mortgage advisors and solicitors. And if you don't do the renovations yourself, you'd have to find the workmen to do it and no doubt check in on the project. A pension, frankly, will cost you no time at all, especially if you've outsourced the management of it to a financial planner or you're just using a broad market-based investment strategy holding global stock market index funds. I can guarantee you that you'll never get a call at 6 p.m. on a Sunday evening from your pension telling you that the boiler's broken. And that then leads on to financial costs too, actual pounds, shillings and pence. There will be percentage charges applied to your pension investments, but they're unlikely to exceed the initial outlay and ongoing costs associated with property. Like I explained earlier on, if nothing was ever spent on a property, its value would be severely affected, so there'll undoubtedly be costs involved. There are costs on pensions, of course, but there's a degree of control over those, and they will invariably be small percentages that are deducted from the plan on a regular basis, rather than chunky bills that come along and blindside you. And finally, there's the liquidity aspect. Now, it must be said that a pension, by nature, will have a liquidity restriction because you can't access it until age 55, and that will be 57 after 2028. But if we're comparing the strategies for retirement and assuming you're already able to access benefits, a pension will hands down provide more liquidity than property. Property isn't a quick thing to sell. You have to go through a whole process, and it involves a number of people again, and generally a lot of cost. A defined contribution pension, assuming it's not invested in property, will allow quick and easy access. Not only that though, pensions can also be more conducive to your own liquidity when you're investing funds. You can choose your level of contribution, and you can stop and start as required. It's not really possible to do that with mortgages and bills if you're responsible for them. So as you can see, those 5 areas do make pensions look attractive, but there are obviously still advantages to property from a growth aspect and to diversify a portfolio, especially with that powerful leveraging potential. It may be worthwhile noting therefore that you can combine the two. It is possible to buy direct commercial property in a SIPP or a SAS, which stands for Small Self-Administered Scheme. I have a number of company owners who are clients who do this with their own business premises. Their property is owned by their SIPP, and their business is a tenant in that property. That means that the business pays a market rent into the SIPP, which effectively acts as a tax-efficient pension contribution. And the cash that's paid in can be invested. So not only does their pension benefit from growth in the value of the property over time, and they get growth on the contributions paid in, if or when they sell the property in future, all of the sale proceeds come into their pension and the gains are completely sheltered from capital gains tax. It's even possible to borrow up to 50% of the value of a SIPP to purchase a property of higher value. So in theory, let's say your pot is worth £200,000, you could borrow £100,000 to purchase a property worth £300,000. In practice, there'd be some setup fees, so the purchase price would have to be lower than that. But that's the idea. I believe both pensions and property have their place in retirement planning, but it's good to be aware of the facts.